This old book, these pictures, they are proof that we were here, that we survived.
They tried to bury our history, child. Burn the pictures, tear the pages.
They try to bury our history, burn the pages, burn the pictures, make the children forget the names. But some memories refuse to die. In Black families across the South, children often heard warnings without explanations. Grandmothers lowered their voices. Grandfathers stared out across porches before speaking carefully. And instead of names, they simply said, they. They don't want us reading too much. They don't want us owning too much. They don't want us asking too many questions. Sometimes the children never even knew exactly who they were. Only that fear had lived in the room long before they arrived, because memory itself had become dangerous. After slavery, Black families carried history the only way many of them could. Through stories, through songs, through church mothers, through whispered warnings, through old photographs hidden in drawers, through family Bibles with names written inside them like protected treasure. And if you care about preserving these stories, if you believe history should never be erased, take a moment right now to subscribe, press the like button, and turn on the notification bell so these stories can continue reaching more people. Because even when schools were burned, even when records disappeared, even when whole communities were silenced, the memory survived. And this is how memory survived the fire. The children noticed it early. Every time certain subjects came up, the room changed. Grandmama might stop stirring the pot for a moment. Grandpa might look toward the window before answering too quickly. Laughter got quieter. Voices got softer. Some stories suddenly ended before they really began. Somewhere in the middle of the warning came the same word. They. They ran him out of town. They burned that church. They said don't stay out after dark. They said don't let the children talk too loud. Nobody explained who they were at first. The children were simply expected to understand. In many Black families across the South, survival depended on understanding danger without speaking it too plainly. Some grandparents had lived through nights when a knock at the door could change a family forever. Some had seen men disappear. Some had watched veterans come home from war, wearing uniforms for freedom overseas, while still being treated like second-class citizens back home. Over time, fear developed its own language. A look across the dinner table, a whisper in church, a warning before sundown, a sentence cut short when strangers walked by. Even photographs carried caution. Some families hid pictures in drawers and Bibles because memory itself felt too valuable to lose. Names were protected carefully. Stories were passed quietly from one generation to the next, like fragile heirlooms surviving a storm. Some of you listening right now probably heard warnings like this in your own family. The people who survived understood something important. A burned book could be replaced. A destroyed building could be rebuilt. Lost photographs could sometimes be found again. Lost memory was harder to recover. That is why so many grandparents repeated the same stories over and over again. Children sometimes thought the elders were simply talking too much. What they did not understand was that repetition was protection. Every retold story became another chance for survival. One generation told the next who owned the land before it was taken. One generation explained where the family came from before records disappeared. One generation warned the next about roads to avoid, towns to leave before dark, and dangers nobody wrote down in history books. Memory traveled through kitchens. Memory traveled through churches. Memory traveled through songs, funerals, front porches, and long car rides across the South. Some families carried old newspaper clippings, folded carefully inside Bibles. Some protected military photographs like sacred treasures. Some held on to names that slavery, migration, and fear had almost erased. Many black children grew up hearing stories about relatives they never met, but somehow still felt connected to. A grandfather who left Mississippi and never returned. A great aunt who disappeared during migration north. A cousin whose name was spoken carefully decades later. The elders understood something many children only realized later. If the story disappears, part of the people disappear with it.
We lost people, but we kept going.
You carry what you have to carry. You let the rest go by. And you walk through it like you belong there, because you do.
That silence confused many younger generations. Some children thought the elders were hiding the past because they were ashamed. The truth was often much heavier than shame. Some elders stayed silent because they knew exactly what fear looked like. Fear looked like fathers leaving home at night and mothers praying they returned safely. Fear looked like veterans wearing the uniform of the United States military while still being called boy in their own hometowns. Fear looked like a family hearing a car slow down outside after dark and suddenly turning off the lights without explanation. Children noticed these things even when nobody explained them. They noticed how certain subjects caused grandparents to stare into the distance for a moment before answering carefully. They noticed how some relatives refused to talk about Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, or the Carolinas without lowering their voices first. They noticed how old photographs sometimes disappeared into drawers the moment strangers entered the room. Some families carried survival habits long after the danger changed. Doors locked early, curtains closed quickly. Children warned not to challenge certain people publicly. Parents teaching respect in ways that sometimes felt harsh because they believed one wrong move could cost a child their future or their life. Many younger generations misunderstood that fear. They saw silence, but did not see the memories hiding underneath it. They saw caution, but did not see the funerals, threats, humiliations, and disappearances that created it. The elders were not simply protecting secrets. Many believed they were protecting their children from carrying the same terror they once carried themselves. Some parents and grandparents made a painful decision. They chose silence because they hoped silence might allow the next generation to live lighter than they had lived. They wanted children focused on school, church, work, military service, and opportunity, instead of constantly looking over their shoulders in fear. Still, silence came with a cost. Questions remained unanswered for decades. Family histories became incomplete. Younger generations sometimes grew up disconnected from places, names, and stories that once shaped the entire family. Some people left the South and never spoke about home again. Mississippi became down there. Alabama became the old days. Certain towns became places nobody mentioned at the dinner table, unless an elder accidentally drifted into memory for a few moments before catching themselves. Yet memory has a way of surviving even inside silence. A photograph hidden in a Bible, a name repeated at funerals, a warning passed quietly to grandchildren, a church song carrying pain nobody explained directly. The younger generations often inherited fragments before they inherited full understanding. Many did not realize until adulthood that those fragments were pieces of survival stories stretching back through segregation, migration, war, lynching, burned communities, stolen land, and families forced to rebuild over and over. What the children inherited was not always a full story. More often it was a fragment, a warning with no explanation, a name spoken once and never mentioned again, a look on an elder's face that carried meaning a child could feel, even when they could not yet understand it. A silence that settled over the room whenever certain memories came too close. That is what made it confusing for younger generations. They knew something was there. They could feel the weight of it. But they were not always given the whole map. So they grew up trying to understand history from pieces. They learned to listen for what was missing. They learned that a pause could mean as much as a sentence. They learned that family history did not always arrive in order, neatly explained and easy to hold. It came scattered. It came in fragments. It came through tone, expression, caution, and the sudden change in a room when the past brushed against the present. A child might mistake silence for distance. A teenager might mistake strictness for coldness. A grown adult might not understand until much later that what once felt like emotional absence was sometimes protection, grief, fear, or memory that had never found safe language. That is how the past kept traveling forward, even when nobody sat down and told it straight. It lived in atmosphere. It lived in reactions. It lived in half-finished stories and warnings repeated so often they sounded ordinary. And for many children, that meant growing up with the feeling of history long before they had the facts for it. For many people, that understanding did not come in childhood. It came later. It came when they were old enough to look back and see their elders differently, old enough to hear the silence with new ears, old enough to recognize that what once felt confusing, distant, or even hurtful had often been carrying something much heavier underneath. That is when the fragments began to make sense, the warning that seemed too sharp, the look that stopped a conversation cold, the name nobody wanted to explain, the stories that never quite finished themselves. All of it had meaning. And with time, some grown children began to realize that their elders had not failed to remember. They had remembered too much. They had lived close enough to fear, loss, and danger that memory itself had to be handled carefully. That realization can be painful because it means rethinking people you thought you understood. It means realizing that what felt like distance may have been protection. What felt like hardness may have been fear. What felt like silence may have been love, trying to keep danger from crossing into the next generation. That is when memory changes shape. It stops feeling like a blank space and starts feeling like a guarded inheritance. And once that happens, the next generation faces its own question. What do you do with the fragments once you finally understand they were trying to save something? That is why memory could never stay only in the past. Once the next generation began to understand what the elders had been carrying, another question naturally followed. What were they trying to protect? Because people do not guard memory that fiercely unless something valuable is attached to it. They do not repeat warnings for no reason. They do not teach children caution, discipline, and silence unless they have already learned how quickly a family can lose what little it has. So behind all that guarded memory was something deeper. People were trying to hold on to more than stories. They were trying to hold on to family, to dignity, to names, to land when they could get it, to opportunity when it appeared, to anything that might help the next generation stand on stronger ground than the one before. That is where the story begins to change. Memory was not only about pain, it was also about preservation. It was about holding on to what slavery tried to break, holding on to what migration tried to scatter, holding on to what poverty, silence, and fear kept threatening to take apart. And once you see that, you start to understand something important. The elders were not only protecting the past, they were trying to protect the future too. And that is where another commandment begins to come into view, not fully spoken yet, but standing there just beyond the edge of memory. The commandment to build, the commandment to keep, the commandment to protect what is yours before the world teaches you how easily it can disappear. What they were trying to hand forward was never only information, it was preservation. The preservation of family when families had been broken before. The preservation of names when names had been erased, changed, or buried. The preservation of memory when memory itself had once been dangerous to speak too plainly. The preservation of whatever a people could still call their own in a world that had already shown how quickly land, safety, dignity, and opportunity could be taken. That is why commandment number 2 could never stay only about remembering. It also began pointing toward keeping what had survived, keeping what had been built, keeping what was fragile enough to disappear if nobody protected it. And that is where another commandment starts coming into view. Not fully spoken yet, but close enough to feel. The commandment to build, the commandment to keep, the commandment to protect what is yours before the world teaches you how easily it can vanish. That mattered in Mississippi. It mattered in Chicago. It mattered anywhere Black families were trying to hold a future together with hands already full of history. Memory alone was not enough. At some point, memory had to become action. It had to become something a family could stand on, something a child could inherit, something strong enough to survive not just one hard season, but generations of pressure. That is why building mattered so much. Not building just for pride, not building just to say something had been achieved, but building because survival needed structure. A family needed more than warnings. It needed stability. A people needed more than memory. They needed something they could keep. Land when it could be bought. A home when it could be protected. A church when it could anchor the neighborhood. A school when children needed more than hope. A business when employment alone left families too vulnerable. That is what many elders understood, even if they did not always explain it in polished language. If you do not build, somebody else decides what survives. If you do not protect what you have, somebody else studies how to take it. That is why so much pain sits underneath Black history, around land, neighborhood, schooling, wages, and ownership. People were not just trying to get by. They were trying to secure something the next generation would not have to start from zero. That is why the commandments connect. Learn to read, teach another, tell the story truthfully, then build something strong enough to hold that truth in place. Because wisdom without structure can still be lost. Memory without protection can still be erased. And a people without something to stand on can be pushed backward, even after coming so far forward. People were not only trying to survive the day they were living in, they were trying to preserve something beyond it. That is what made memory so important. Not simply the act of looking back, but the act of holding on. Holding on to names, holding on to kin, holding on to ways of thinking, praying, teaching, and warning that had helped people endure what should never have had to be endured. For Black families, preservation was not abstract. It was practical. It could mean saving letters, keeping photographs, remembering who belonged to whom, protecting family land when land could be kept, holding tight to education because it could travel even when everything else was taken. That is why elders carried so much urgency. They knew how quickly a people could lose what little they had if nobody guarded it. And they knew that once memory was broken, everything else became easier to scatter. Family could be scattered, history could be scattered, possibility could be scattered. So preservation became part of survival too. Not only keeping bodies alive, but keeping meaning alive, keeping continuity alive, keeping enough of yourself intact that the next generation would inherit more than confusion. That is where the story begins to turn. Because once a people understand, they must remember, the next question is unavoidable. What must be protected so that memory becomes more than mourning? What had to be protected was never only one thing. Sometimes it was land. Sometimes it was education. Sometimes it was family structure, reputation, or a child's chance to move one step farther than the people who came before them. That is why preservation always carried tension inside it. Black families were trying to keep hold of things in a country that had already shown how easily Black effort could be stolen, scattered, or erased. A family could work hard for years and still watch opportunity disappear through policy, violence, debt, or the simple fact that somebody with more power had decided their progress would go no farther. So the need to protect what was yours became part of the survival code too. Not out of greed, out of memory, out of understanding, out of knowing what it costs to build anything at all. That is why elders could sound so serious when they talked about wasting opportunity, losing direction, or failing to value what had been handed down. They were not only worried about one bad choice, they were thinking across generations. They were thinking about how fragile progress could be, and how quickly something meaningful could slip away if nobody guarded it. That is where memory begins to lean toward another commandment. Not only tell the story truthfully, but build carefully, keep carefully, protect carefully. Because a people who understand what they survived will eventually ask a harder question. Memory was not just about pain. Some people misunderstand what the elders were trying to do. The silence was never only about fear, and the stories were never only about suffering. The memories carried instructions. Grandmothers were not just telling stories while shelling peas on the porch. Grandfathers were not just repeating old names from the past. Those memories were survival lessons hidden inside conversation. Which road not to walk after dark? Which family once owned the land nearby? Which church helped people when nobody else would? Which teacher secretly taught children to read? Which neighbor could be trusted? And which smile could get somebody hurt? Memory became a map because after slavery ended, black families quickly learned something dangerous. If you lost your memory, you could lose everything else afterward. Land could be stolen. Votes could be blocked. Schools could be burned. History books could erase names. Entire communities could disappear from maps, but memory could rebuild what was destroyed. That is why so many elders protected stories, even when their voices trembled telling them, because they understood something younger generations are now rediscovering. When people forget where they came from, somebody else begins rewriting who they are. And maybe that is why so many people tried so hard to erase these stories in the first place. Not because the stories were weak, but because they were powerful. Because memory creates identity. Memory creates unity. Memory creates direction. And eventually, memory creates action. That is where the next commandment begins. Because once people remembered who they were, many black families began trying to build something nobody could easily take away again. Not just memories, but protection. Not just survival, but stability. Freedom without ownership still left people vulnerable. A family could work hard for generations and still lose everything overnight. That fear became very real after slavery. Some freed people saved coins in jars beneath floorboards. Others pulled money together through churches and family networks. Parents worked fields from sunrise to dark, hoping to buy even a small piece of land. Land meant food. Land meant safety. Land meant a place where your children might stand a little taller than you did. That is why so many black communities began forming schools, farms, churches, businesses, and entire towns after emancipation. Places like Eatonville, Mound Bayou, and many others were not accidents. They were attempts to build protection around freedom itself. Because the elders understood something painful. Memory could guide a people, but ownership could help defend the future. And that opened the door to another lesson former slaves tried desperately to pass down after emancipation. Do not just survive freedom, build something that can protect it. After emancipation, many black families understood something that history books rarely explain clearly enough. Freedom without ownership could disappear very quickly. A person could be legally free in the morning and still hungry by nightfall. That is why land became more than dirt. It became protection. It became survival. Across the South, formerly enslaved people worked impossible hours trying to buy pieces of land nobody else wanted. Some purchased swampy ground. Some bought exhausted farmland. Others built homes near railroad tracks, forests, or places white landowners ignored. But to black families, ownership meant something larger than property. It meant finally planting roots in a country that had spent generations treating them like property themselves. Mothers taught children to save every penny possible. Fathers sometimes worked 2 or 3 jobs just to hold on to tax payments. Churches organized collections to help struggling families keep land from being taken away. Entire communities protected one another because everyone understood the danger. Once land was lost, freedom often became fragile again. That is why all black towns began appearing across America after slavery. Eatonville, Mound Bayou, and many others were not simply towns. They were shields, places where black families hoped their children could breathe differently, walk differently, dream differently. Because ownership was not just about wealth, ownership was about dignity. Many elders believed if future generations failed to protect land, businesses, schools, and community institutions, they could slowly lose pieces of freedom all over again. That fear did not come from imagination. It came from experience. Black families watched land stolen through dishonest contracts, violence, intimidation, unfair taxes, and laws designed to keep power in the same hands. Some people were forced away from property they had worked for their entire lives. Others saw roads cut directly through thriving black neighborhoods. Banks denied loans. Schools received fewer resources. Businesses struggled to survive without equal protection. Over time, many communities realized freedom required more than courage. It required structure. That is why elders pushed education so hard. Why churches became community centers. Why teachers were respected so deeply. Why some families guarded recipes, farming knowledge, trade skills, and even family records like treasure. They understood that survival depended on passing down more than memories. It depended on passing down tools. In many homes, children heard the same warning repeated again and again. Do not let what our people built disappear. Because once something is lost for one generation, it can take many generations to rebuild it. And maybe that is part of what makes these stories emotional even today. Many descendants are still searching for missing pieces. Lost land, lost names, lost records, lost history. But despite everything that was taken, many black families kept building anyway. That determination became one of the strongest forms of resistance after slavery truly ended. Some families rebuilt after losing everything more than once. Others migrated north carrying little more than photographs, Bibles, and stories passed from one generation to the next. Even when opportunities were limited, many parents still believed the next generation could rise higher if they protected knowledge, land, faith, and community. That belief helped black families survive some of the hardest decades in American history. It also explains why so many elders spoke with urgency when they talked about ownership. To them, losing a business was not just losing money. Losing land was not just losing property. Losing schools and churches was not just about buildings. It meant losing protection, stability, and identity. That is why the struggle after slavery did not end with emancipation papers. In many ways, it was only beginning, because freedom had to be defended generation after generation, sometimes quietly, sometimes publicly, sometimes through marches and protests, sometimes through simply refusing to give up what earlier generations sacrificed to build. And maybe that is what younger generations are rediscovering today. The stories were never only about pain. They were also about instruction, about warning, about preparation, about survival. The elders were trying to leave behind more than memories. They were trying to leave behind a roadmap for the future before time erased their voices forever. Before many elders passed away, they tried to leave younger generations with one final understanding. Freedom is fragile when people forget the sacrifices that created it. That is why so many grandparents repeated the same stories over and over again, even when younger listeners sometimes grew tired of hearing them. They were not simply remembering the past. They were trying to prepare the future, prepare children for systems that could still be unfair, prepare families for moments when unity would matter, prepare communities to protect what earlier generations fought to build. Because history had already shown them what could happen when people became disconnected from one another. Land could disappear. Businesses could collapse. Schools could close. Neighborhoods could slowly change until the original families were pushed out completely. And yet, despite all of that, generation after generation kept rebuilding, kept teaching, kept believing. That may be one of the most extraordinary parts of this entire story. People who survived slavery, segregation, violence, and discrimination still found ways to create beauty. Music, churches, schools, farms, businesses, military heroes, teachers, artists, and entire communities that changed America itself. And maybe that is the deeper meaning behind this second commandment after slavery. Protect the memory, tell the story, pass it forward. Because when memory survives, identity survives. When identity survives, community survives. And when community survives, people still have a chance to build a future stronger than the chains they came from. That may be why these stories still matter today, even generations later. Across America, many people are still searching for pieces of themselves that history almost erased. Old family photographs tucked into drawers, land records hidden in courthouse basements, military papers folded inside Bibles, names written on the backs of faded pictures, stories whispered on porches that younger generations once thought were unimportant. But now many people are beginning to understand those fragments were never small things. They were evidence, proof that people survived, proof that families endured, proof that entire communities fought to remain standing even when the world around them tried to push them aside. And maybe that is part of what makes this journey emotional for so many viewers watching now. Because these commandments were never just about the past. They still speak to the present. Learn, teach, protect family, build schools, support businesses, study the law, stand together, hold on to freedom. Those lessons continue echoing across generations because the struggles that created them never fully disappeared. They simply changed form over time. And perhaps that is why remembering matters so much, because people who understand their history often begin seeing their future differently. They begin recognizing patterns. They begin protecting one another more carefully. They begin rebuilding connections that earlier generations fought desperately to preserve. The elders understood something many people today are still trying to understand. Freedom could disappear if the next generation forgot what had happened. That is why they protected the stories. That is why they whispered names at kitchen tables. That is why grandmothers kept old photographs hidden in Bibles. That is why grandfathers repeated the same warnings over and over again. Not because they wanted children trapped in pain, but because they knew memory could become protection. Memory taught people where danger lived. Memory taught people who they were. Memory reminded families that survival itself was an accomplishment. But eventually, another realization began to grow. Memory alone could not fully protect the future. A story could inspire a child, but land could shelter a family. Knowledge could open a mind, but ownership could create stability. The people who survived slavery, Jim Crow, racial violence, stolen opportunities, and forced migration slowly began asking a new question. How do we build something that cannot easily be taken away again? That question helped shape the next commandment. Save what you can. Buy land if possible. Build something your children can inherit. Because many black families realized freedom became far more fragile when people own nothing. Without ownership, entire communities could disappear in a single generation. Without inheritance, children often had to restart the struggle from the beginning again and again. That is why churches pooled money. That is why families bought tiny pieces of land together. That is why people started schools, farms, businesses, funeral homes, newspapers, and towns of their own. They were trying to turn survival into permanence. And even today, the fight over land, ownership, education, and memory is still not over. Some families are still searching for records. Some communities are still trying to hold on to property passed down for generations. Some people are still discovering stories their elders were too afraid to tell out loud. That is why these commandments still matter, not as ancient history, not as politics, but as survival instructions passed from one generation to another. If this story connected with you, subscribe to Rondia Kaufer, From Chains to Change, and stay with this series as we continue building all 10 commandments together. And before you leave, tell me in the comments, what lessons did your elders try to protect before they were gone? Because sometimes the most powerful history never made it into textbooks. Sometimes it survived because somebody in the family refused to let the memory die.